The cost of inefficiency is the single greatest killer of all margin and all cash flow on any construction project. Well, survival mode means there's just a lot going on. I'm scared to death, super nervous. You just don't understand how busy I am. This person didn't show, that person didn't show. I got to order these materials. I got to do that. All that you just heard me say is exactly what shows up when you don't have the right people in place and you don't have systems for doing it. So you have to create that foundation to get those systems in place and then put the people in the right seat, on the right bus, attached to the right part of the system so that you don't have that anxiety and that stress associated to not being prepared. So even though they were growing and on paper had tons of profit, survival mode was what was happening day to day because there wasn't enough cash to execute on the growth and they didn't know how much cash they actually needed, which led to all the problems, which ultimately led to the whole thing coming down. Let me tell you two of the things they realized that were really critical for them coming out of it. One, what are the core values of your organization? What are you going to stand for? What are you going to represent? Why is that so critical? Well, when you're growing really fast and you have lots of projects, your core values are the foundational heartbeat of your business. And it's critical that you make sure your paperwork is tight, your systems are tight, and you document things. Welcome everybody to today's episode of the Construction MF'ers podcast. I am 𝗧𝗵𝗲 CEO and founder of Mobilization Funding, and today we are going to talk about the truth of running a cash flow positive business in the construction world. So why am I talking about that? Why is the finance guy who's not in construction even remotely capable or should be speaking at all about that? Well, the truth is, in the 11 years that we've been in the mobilization funding business, and I personally have walked through it each and every day, I can tell you the first 8.5 years look vastly different than the last 2.5 or 3 years. Why is that? All of these lessons, all of these things I ever speak about and learn, typically and most often from a pain perspective, come from the lessons learned in those first 8 years. Cash flow in a construction business, cash flow on a project, regardless of where we're talking about it, we've learned so much in the hundreds and hundreds of projects we finance in the front end, so much so that every time one of our clients that we made a loan to ended in some pain, we ended in pain too. When they were successful, guess what? Yep, we were successful. And tracking each one of those projects and each level of lessons learned molded our program, our own strategy, the way we initiated, help people, help customers, all of that was created in that time frame. Now, we didn't even start putting videos out. I didn't even get on LinkedIn until 7 years into mobilization funding. And so it was in that COVID era that all of these things started to come together. COVID also gave us some great information about this. And COVID in particular, alongside the cash flow of a particular project, showed us that cash flow and what perfect cash flow looks like in a business, particularly a construction business, looks like. And so I'm going to rip through some of those with you now. I want to address the financial foundation that you have, the groundwork of your organization. But before we do that, I want to talk about some assumptions, maybe misconceptions in the construction world that just, I think, lead to some of the issues and problems, and just some awareness around that. First, I think there's an assumption around how much money people actually make, how much someone might be making, could be making, or should be making. And then it influences all the decisions that everyone has. For example, construction costs are high and they go up. Everyone assumes that commercial subcontractors must be killing it. General contractors are killing it, and vice versa. It's not always the case. Sometimes when construction costs go high, it actually kills and hurts the margin of commercial subcontractors. Another example, they make assumptions about the actual costs. And one thing that always gets missed is the cost of inefficiency. And I see that in all of those years I talked about, the cost of inefficiency is the single greatest killer of all margin and all cash flow on any construction project. I think that actually goes for not only commercial subcontractors, but I also think that goes for general contractors. I believe that the cost of inefficiency is exactly the trigger point for what starts to push the tension back and forth between GC sub supplier, supplier to sub to GC, GC to even the owner developer. Because as that inefficiency kicks in, those costs become real. Now everyone's looking to try to maintain profitability, and the only place to do it in those scenarios is to take it from someone else. And I don't think people do it intentionally. I just think it is the way it is. So what does cost of inefficiency even look like? It shows up by project delays. If you're expected to have 10 weeks worth of labor on a job and it ends up with 13, those extra 3 weeks of cost are just pure hits to the bottom line. Those are the things we're talking about. Now you initiate change orders, that becomes an issue. And it just snowballs from there. The third thing that I think really triggers a lot of this is I don't think there's enough credence given to the volume of dollars and the pure numbers in a construction project. Any one of these scenarios that goes hand in hand can create the same kind of issues, same kind of tension. When you have $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 problems, there's a lot of options to fix it. Lenders, credit cards, etc. But when you're in commercial construction and those $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 problems have one extra zero on them, it becomes a $50,000, $100,000, $150,000 problem. Add a little more zeros, it becomes even a $500,000 problem, a $1 million problem. The same problem, the same mechanics, it's dealt with in the same manner, but the solutions get significantly limited because a $500,000 problem is a lot different than a $5,000 problem. There's no credit card you can use for that. The suppliers are going to be more nervous. There's more risk around it just by the sheer dollar volume. I think that one thing alone, coupled with the inefficiency, is really what drives a lot of the angst and issues that drive in construction because the numbers just get so big. Now that we've covered that, let's go through the foundation in your own organization. Well, first, if you're going to have a great, strong project, it has to be made up of great, strong people. Great, strong people have great, strong companies. Great, strong companies deliver great, strong projects. So that's first and foremost. So what can you do? First thing is first, make yourself strong. Individually, but also your company. And on a project, that is done by people, process, culture, systems, and relationships. Those 5 things allow you to be able to deliver a great outcome. If you don't have the right people, it's going to have a significant risk to it. If you don't have the capital, the money, that's going to be a risk. If you don't have the supplier relationships, problem. If you don't have the people needed to do the labor, also problem. And then of course, as you funnel all those things together, you don't have any systems and processes internally to manage that, that's going to lead to problem. That kind of problem leads to paperwork problems, which lead to delays, which lead to you not getting paid. So those 5 things are critical for you to have built on your foundation. How do you do that? You do that by performing work and performing the kind of work that you actually can finish and perform well. Don't take just a big job if you don't have all those 5 pieces put together. You have to learn, but take a job that you know you can execute on, where the risks of missing a piece here or there isn't catastrophic to you. That's first. Second, you have to operate outside of survival mode. What does that mean? Well, survival mode means there's just a lot going on. I'm scared to death, super nervous. You just don't understand how busy I am. This person didn't show, that person didn't show. I got to order these materials. I got to do that. All that you just heard me say is exactly what shows up when you don't have the right people in place and you don't have systems for doing it. So you have to create that foundation to get those systems in place and then put the people in the right seat, on the right bus, attached to the right part of the system so that you don't have that anxiety and that stress associated to not being prepared. So that survival mode has to go away. You have to operate from a place where you are confident and you know what you're doing, and that comes from action. That comes from having the right systems and people in the right spot. It's critical. If you don't have that, and that little demo I was giving you where I was running around like I was anxious, if that's you, that's where you have to look first. It's the systems. You can't just put a person in place and hope and pray that they're going to make that pain go away. They won't. Your systems, they can run your system. They might even be able to create the system, but the system is what's going to give all of you collectively the information and also the comfort you need to be able to execute outside of survival mode. So, strong foundation, great systems, no survival mode, you can start to really build a great business, and this is how you're going to start to cash flow it. Now let's get into the next topic. The next step. What does it look like if you don't have this and you say, all right, Scott, I don't care. I'm going to hammer this anyway. I'll figure it out as I go, which you absolutely have to do. Remind you, what I'm talking about is you have to go, but you need to do it in the right increments for the things that you can actually manage. You don't want to just go and on a huge project that can bring your whole business down. So what does it look like if you go and you don't have these things in place? Well, we've had few of those instances occur. And it looks something like this. You're growing real fast. You're in a market that's also growing real fast. Now, why is that important? Well, if a market's growing real fast and you're a player and you have a stronghold in it, you're going to get a lot more work, which naturally means you're going to get a lot more opportunities, which also means you probably start bidding them a little higher, which also means you're trying not to turn down work that has high profit margins. What you're not doing, though, if you don't have a strong foundation or systems in place or people, you're not understanding what the cost to execute that is going to be. And you're hoping and praying that because you have the right margin in there, without understanding the cash flow and how that's going to manage it, that you'll still just be able to figure it out. And the problem, as I started talking about, as you grow fast, those numbers on a project are bigger. The solutions you had prior to, like credit cards or extended terms, it's a lot easier to get a supplier to extend $40,000 terms to you than when you're trying to get $400,000 terms extended. These are the things that I'm talking about. And that's what happened on one of these projects with one of the customers that we saw and we worked with. And they grew. Accolades, awards, all kinds of things, doing projects. And you know what? They could do great work. They still did great work even while they were hurting. The problem was it's the compilation of how much work they had to do with the lack of capital, the lack of systems that actually made it look like they didn't know what they were doing. And ultimately that led them straight into a bankruptcy. Why? Because when the house of cards came down, they filled the holes with debt. They filled the holes with the wrong kind of debt. And yes, you've heard me talk about it many times. They filled those holes with merchant cash advances. But even if they had not, the amount of debt that they created and the extra cost on the business because of the growth and those decisions, which led to a very scarcity mindset, which meant they were trying to be in survival mode. And survival mode instead of growth mode became the key leading indicator of decision making. So even though they were growing and on paper had tons of profit, survival mode was what was happening day to day because there wasn't enough cash to execute on the growth and they didn't know how much cash they actually needed, which led to all the problems, which ultimately led to the whole thing coming down. And then instead of being able to take advantage of some of that opportunistic growth, they weren't able to take advantage of any of it, and the entire business had to be liquidated. Now, that's a catastrophic story for something that was really good people, really capable, and going to come back out on the other side, I'm sure. But these are the things that we're trying to avoid, and what I'm talking about here is exactly what you need to do in order to avoid that scenario. All right, so coming off that story, these folks are going to come back out. They're going to be stronger than ever. They didn't lose the knowledge. They didn't lose the willpower. And you know what? Thankfully, and I prayerfully am happy to hear that they're not scared to start again. This time, they're going to have all this information and all this knowledge. Meeting with them earlier, let me tell you two of the things they realized that were really critical for them coming out of it. One, what are the core values of your organization? What are you going to stand for? What are you going to represent? Why is that so critical? Well, when you're growing really fast and you have lots of projects, your core values are the foundational heartbeat of your business. When you have a lot of people in a lot of different places making lots of decisions across their scope of work in your organization, the one single owner who might have made all the decisions from the beginning, or maybe they're 2, 3 different leaders, ultimately when you're growing fast, you have to rely on those systems. And certain systems, decisions come up and the person that's leading that has to be guided by the same set of core principles and values so they can make decisions. They have to know what those decisions are. What does this business stand for? What are we going to do? What aren't we going to do? What is our budget? What happens when we're out of budget? That we make the right decision? What happens when we're with a customer? We take care of the customer. At what variance? At what availability? Those types of core values provide the foundational strength for not only you, but your team and your employees to make the decisions that are in the best interest of your organization. It also allows them to have the trust that if they make those decisions based on those core values, that they're safe and they're protected, that you're not going to come down screaming at them when they explain, hey, we do the right thing. Well, my decision here, this is what happened. This is what I felt the right thing was to do. So I made the decision and I moved on. And you need to be able to understand that as a leader in your business or even the owner of your business. So that's why those core values are so key. The second thing they realized is we have got to document the information that we disseminate to our customers, to our suppliers, to our lenders. We can't make assumptions that everybody's just going to do it the way we want, do it the way we talked about on the phone. You have to dot your I's and cross your T's. Now, that doesn't mean you need to have paperwork slow you down, or you can't make decisions without paperwork and documentation, because that's not fun. No one likes working with an organization that way either. But there's certain levels and certain times where things need to be documented, even if it's on email. Dotting your I's and crossing your T's is a critical function of that. When they were just taking money quickly from a lender and just signing whatever they read, they didn't realize the implications of that. When they were getting a new work and they saw that they were awarded the price that they had and they didn't have their attorney do a quick review of it, they didn't catch the 2 or 3 other clauses and terms in there that were detrimental to their success. Those are the kinds of things that I'm talking about. And it's critical that you make sure your paperwork is tight, your systems are tight, and you document things. I'll give you a quick story that's it's related to construction, but it's not from the construction contractor. We had a lender that was a friend of ours that we met, we knew about, they were aware. They actually referred a client to us. We couldn't work with that client for a different story and a bunch of different reasons, but they did not properly document the loans that they made. This particular client ended up going into bankruptcy. And because they didn't document the loans that they made, they didn't have a real loan. They didn't have a documented history of how much money was actually sent. Sure, the transaction history was there, but it wasn't papered up properly in their loan agreements. And those loan agreements ultimately are the thing that everyone has to rely on. It's no different than your construction contract. So there's an example from a lender's perspective to the commercial construction industry. And it's no different than having a subcontract agreement with your general contractor or a development agreement with your ultimate developer and their bank as a GC. So proper documentation, proper information, that is the key. So we talked about a lot of the basics. We talked about the people, the systems, the processes. We've talked about paperwork. We've talked about problems. We've talked about the solutions to those. One of the things, and then before we wrap this up, I want to cover with you all, is what types of innovation, what types of innovative solutions are out there that will help you, guide you, and help you perform even better. Those are the things that you want to look for, little tools that you can build in. Now, I'm not talking about how do I put AI in my business so I don't have to do anything. I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is I need to know the cash flow. Okay, I don't know that. The first instinct might be like, I need to hire somebody. No, maybe you have great people already. Maybe you just need a good tool, like a cash flow tracker, like you hear me talk about all the time, a good project cash flow tool. We have one on our website. Get one from your accountant. It doesn't matter, but a good tool that you can rely on, that you can use, that tells you how much money you're putting out onto each project before you are cash flow positive, how you should spend each and every dollar that is paid to you on that project and when. Simple spreadsheets, simple tools that you can use. That's one example. Maybe you have, I was talking to a client this week earlier that they actually had someone in their office that worked full-time just filing paperwork to protect their lien rights. Now, when you talk to that particular employee, because this company did work in multiple states, they had to go around and figure out all the little different nuances of every little state, county, jurisdiction to make sure they were properly filing paperwork. And of course they were going to make mistakes because each county is different. For those of you that work outside of one county, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I happen to suggest to them, hey, there's a great company out there called 𝗲𝗵𝗶 or others that you can even use that can provide that. But 𝗲𝗵𝗶, which is also owned by Procore, can easily and simply tell you each individual document you need to protect your lien rights. And they were like, really? I'm like, yeah, it's a fee for service. You just pay per item that you need, and it's really very economical. It's not that expensive at all. That one employee was able to do everything they need to do in half the amount of time using 𝗲𝗵𝗶. So instead of thinking they need 2 people to do that, they actually use the same person with a simple piece of software at a fraction of the cost, and now that person actually has half of their time back to do something else. Just things like that you can find all over your organization depending on what type of thing it is. That's just an example. In conclusion, I want you guys to think about this video. Go back and listen to the first 4 or 5 principles. Listen to the things that drive success, the things that drive failure, what you can do to overcome them, and make sure that you're tracking what your cash flow is so you can be a cash flow positive business. And it all starts with you. The simple things you can do that trickle out through your organization to your customers, to great delivery of performance services that you render, and ultimately that's going to give you the success you need with your customers and ultimately trickle down into your business and into your pocket. I hope you liked this video. I encourage you to please subscribe to our channel, give us a share, tell people where you can find us, and if this information is helpful to you, do me the best favor ever and actually implement it into your organization, and then let people know how the success was. Let us know how it went. Till next time, I hope you have a great week, and may God bless you.